Hey, Becker, Scotty, how are you guys doing tonight?
What's happening, my bud? How are you? Sound a little down. We're doing a new app.
A little nervous. Little nervous. I mean, you guys know by now, right, that the fans of Blotto Beatles have really kind of pinpointed me as the resident Beatles scholar in the group.
Is that true?
Yeah, and
Sure.
Tonight we've got like an actual Beatles scholar on with us, an actual guy. Ken Womack, he's going to come. We got the Woe guys. He's coming. He's written books, plural, about the Beatles. Can I tell you guys something? This is hard.
Lay it on us. It's a safe space.
I've never written a single book about the Beatles. I know I never told you that I did write one, but
Scotty and I know.
You probably just assumed, based on my wealth of knowledge, I'd written a book about the Beatles at some point.
It's been weird that you've been calling yourself that.
So that's okay? You're okay with that?
Not at all.
That feels pretty good to get off my shoulders, actually, though. It was hard to carry that weight. While we're at this, can I tell you one more thing?
Yeah.
Okay. This one's been weighing on me for a little while. You guys know those like super specific and obviously very real facts I start every episode with?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, this is harder than I thought. About those facts. You probably thought I knew them off the top of my head. I had to do research. I'm sorry, guys.
You don't know all that stuff about the Beatles?
No, I had to look it up. It was on Wikipedia. I'm sorry.
Disappointing.
Yeah, okay.
Good evening. Thank you for tuning in. This episode feels like my double fantasy. Best friends talking Beatles with a great guest. Welcome back to Blotto Beatles, celebrated the world over as the leading whys and winos of Beatles broadcasting. We are the podcast where a couple of friends have a couple of drinks and usually come together to discuss and rank a single Beatles song. I'm Becker, and we're coming at you with a tremendous extrasode this week. We are here in the virtual Abbey Road with your Blotto crew. My co-host, great friend, and just an overall beautiful boy, it's Tommy.
Oh, thank you, man. What a compliment.
And this man, he needs no introduction, but he now insists that we do it. You know him as the George Martin of New England. It's Scotty C.
Hello.
Everybody good today?
I'm feeling very good.
We're actually recording our first doubleheader today, so we should
I'm feeling good now. It might get a little bit later.
Easier, so. Yeah. I want to get right to it. We have a very special guest who agreed to join us tonight, and when we reached out to ask what track he wanted to talk about, he absolutely blew our minds and went Beatles adjacent.
Yeah, we're doing Beatles adjacent tonight.
And while we only recently found out that the Beatles have, 200 and something tracks, and this podcast has a lot of work ahead of it, Tommy, I think you told us that they only had like 2 records or something.
I just thought it was the 2 records that were in the White Album. That's all I ever knew about.
I think once you understand the caliber of expertise we're bringing on, that as a podcast, when he says, oh no, you say how high. I want to get this guest on, so let's not delay that any further. Since he agreed to be with us, I've been super excited and sort of on a bunch of tangents that we can talk to him about.
Yeah, chuffed up.
You've been chomping at the bit?
I'm chuffed up about this thing.
Oh, absolutely. Without any further delay, it's my tremendous pleasure to introduce this week's guest. This man has reinvigorated the entire category of Beatles bio books. Tommy, would you say he's a Harrison highbrow?
I might argue he's more of a student of Starkey, personally.
A master of McCartney?
Well, listen, at the very least, he's recently penned a love letter to Lennon, John Lennon, 1980, The Last Days in the Life. I see what you did there, Ken. I get this. I got the joke.
Also authored the fantastic Solid Sound. Let's welcome Kenneth Womack.
Hey, Ken, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming
Thanks
on.
for having me on. I hope I'm suitably blotto.
We'll get there. Don't worry.
We'll get there. This podcast, it's only like 6-hour episodes, so we should be great.
Thanks for blocking out all that time.
No problem.
How has your pandemic been? Are you listening to the Beatles during this? Has your sort of scholarly approach to the Beatles ruined the fun in it?
You know, I don't know about perhaps your other guests, but I've had trouble translating the pandemic into the heavy duty, hardcore writing I thought I would be able to do.
Yeah.
You know, it's sort of your dream situation, you know, when you do this kind of work, to think I'm at home, it's going to happen every day. It's going to be like 3,000 words a day.
Yeah.
And I'll do the other good stuff too. You know, I'll see some TV, but it has not been like that. It's,
All TV?
yeah. No. Well, I mean, it's every day is different, and it's sort of like our world right now. You know, it's kind of
I forget who it was. Someone on Twitter had someone relatively famous had posted out that like it's okay to not feel like you're not productive right now, or
I
not
saw
making
that
art or
too.
doing something. I forget who it was.
Yeah,
but
no,
was
I
like,
saw
all right.
that too, and it didn't make me feel better. Yeah.
Yeah, I had 50 goals on the list when we shut down, and number one was start a podcast that involved drinking and talking about the Beatles with my friends, and that's as far as I've gotten on the list.
Yeah, if only I checked anything off.
But is there a Beatles era or solo work or anything that you will dive into in your evenings or for fun, or are you just not there right now?
Right now, I'm listening to, I think it would be Beatles adjacent, to Layla.
All right.
As I desperately try to finish this book I'm working on with my friend Jason Krupa. So that's where I am at the moment. That's Beatles adjacent, right?
I think we can call that
It's
adjacent.
certainly ex-Beatle wife adjacent.
Exactly.
Which almost makes it Beatles at that point. What?
Yeah, that Venn diagram is pretty big, though. So.
Can you tell us anything about this book?
Sure. Jason and I were interested in spending some time in 1970, and in specific, looking at how those twin albums, you know, they're not truly twins, but they were recorded roughly. They were adjacent to each other, right? many of the same players. And then, of course, the last band that's working on All Things Must Pass turns into Derek and the Dominoes, and they head to Miami a month later, and they meet up with Duane Allman, and there you go.
Nice.
Yeah,
That's
totally.
crazy. I'm
So
excited
it's about that period, and trying to understand how they got there, and of course, we know what happens afterwards.
There's not a ton out there. Like, you're not a guy who's sort of released the 10 top Kenneth Womack tracks. There's not like I can't find you saying who your favorite Beatle is. But in the progression of these books, are we to infer that it's John Lennon and then George Harrison and then maybe one of the other two?
You know, I don't have a favorite Beatle at all. You know, I just I want to write about things that I'm interested in, which, unless there is a pandemic, unless there's a pandemic, I can immediately roll with them.
Sure. Awesome. Well, you did. I mean, let's not even rush the book you have pending, but let's talk about what just came out. Tommy mentioned in the intro, but you just released John Lennon 1980, The Last Days in the Life. Tell us a bit about why you focused on 1980 and John.
You know, I think that we all are still registering a kind of acute loss of John Lennon and what happened 40 years ago. And I was very interested in having a book in the world that wasn't a true crime story, that wasn't all about salaciousness, but instead was about the music and about the creation of that music. Even going back as far as trying to understand the lineage of the demos and the sort of the songwriting heritage of those new compositions, and placing them in the context of what was happening on a day-to-day basis. So that was the experience I wanted to have as a reader, and I wasn't finding it anywhere else. You know, there are probably dozens upon dozens of books that attempt to recount that period. But I wanted one that was just his point of view, as much as we can know that, and to show that level of artistry as he makes this amazing comeback.
Awesome.
It's I don't want to sound like I'm just praising because you are here, but I to be honest, I only started the book today, and I haven't finished it, but I got 50% of the way through it in a couple hours, because it's a gripping retelling of the story. And the thing I love about it is I really feel like at the beginning, we are kind of far from John personally, and as the book moves forward, we get closer to who he is and who his personality is, and what he's feeling at a time, and really the dichotomy of John, that like split brain of like, I want to be a good father, and I want to be a good husband, and I want to take care of my family, and I don't want to necessarily worry about this other life that I had, but I still am drawn to it in some strange manner, and just really humanizes a man who kept saying to the people who knocked on his door and found him outside of the Dakota, like tried to, canonize him there. And he kept saying, no, I'm just a guy like you. And what are you going to do, sort of thing. It's really, really cool retelling of the story. So I'm excited about it. I can't wait to finish it as soon as we get off this call, to be honest.
Well, we'll all wait if you want. Yeah. Because I'll be very curious to hear what you think about the ending. I tried to do something.
Yeah, no spoilers. I don't want to know what happens.
Okay, no spoilers. But yeah, email me later.
Yeah.
This same thing. The way I felt about the book is that I really wish that this was something that was available to me when I was first started like fervently reading all the Beatles books that were available to me, because you do a very good job about telling the John and Yoko story still in the context of talking about 1980, and I think that's fantastic. Like, I don't need to pick up another book about John Lennon and start off with him as a child and hear about his mother and all that again. And I know probably some people do, but like, this is a book that I wish was available to me a long, long time ago. So I think it's fantastic.
Well, I appreciate that. And that was a big part of the challenge, was how far do you go back, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to go back to 1975 to understand why he's in the Dakota anyway.
Yeah.
And why he is sort of settled into this, I know we use the word incorrectly, but this kind of retirement. He wasn't retired, wasn't getting his pension check or anything. He had just he checked out by his own volition. So it made sense to go there. But you do realize, I think about this a lot. How much do you need to tell for the person who this is the only time they're going to pick it up? And it's hard to create standalone books in that way, but with this period, there's just such an energy to it. I wanted to try to capture that.
Sure, and I think it's working. I'm pumped about it. So, if you, from where you stand now, clearly you've committed a ton of your life to the Beatles. If they had not existed, who do you think you would focus on?
Wow.
But let's say the impact is still out there, right? Clearly we can say the Beatles changed everything, which they have. But let's say that they're just zapped from the history books.
Yeah, I think there was a movie that did that.
We try not to address that movie.
Yeah, let's not do that.
Unless they want to be a guest on this podcast.
Then we're all
I could see writing about Radiohead.
Oh yeah.
I've thought because I'm thinking about what's next, because I could be getting to the end of the road on this, and I could see writing about somebody like a Radiohead or Pink Floyd. A band that has a body of work is what I would be interested in.
Have you ever considered writing about like sort of a similar starting point of just like three gentlemen with a dream of a podcast where they get together and have beers and like their story growing up, and
Well, I could be convinced for money.
Yeah, so could we.
I think last week it occurred to me, at least, that if I redid a drunken podcast, I would think about it being about Springsteen, where I think I know all of his material, but I don't know that I've addressed it sort of critically as much. And I think it would be a fun sort of exploration.
I always say it would be Fugazi, but it'd be weird to do a drunk Fugazi podcast. So
yes, absolutely. Ken, you're also podcasting these days. What's that all about? Getting into this fad?
Yeah, it's a partnership with Salon.com. And we've been working on this concept for a while, and it's based on some columns I've written for them, and also the notion of I get a lot of requests to review material for artists, and it's a way to bring some of those artists on and talk to them as a way of entree about their Beatles story, right? When did you discover the Beatles? And how have they impacted your life? And, oh, by the way, you have a new record. Let's talk about that.
Nice.
That sort of thing. But it's been a lot of fun and surprisingly moving at times to hear from folks and how the Beatles have touched their lives. And I'm actually open, as I'm sure you guys would be too, if you were Blotto enough. I'm open to folks who maybe don't like the Beatles, right? And I kind of hope for a guest like that at some point.
That was actually our first guest we had on. Was
you
a friend
have had
of ours
one of
who
those.
vehemently doesn't like the Beatles, and
No
it was
kidding.
great. Yeah.
I don't know if I ever totally believe these people, but he's a friend of ours, so I took him at his word, I just don't. I mean, what's the compelling argument to not like the Beatles? It's usually because I'm really into the Stones is the response, I guess. But I mean, I think you can live in both worlds.
Oh, I love them both. Yeah, I need them both in my life. They're essential. Yeah. But again, I don't have favorites, right? In that vein, I don't. So it's okay for me. But I'm a bit skeptical of it too.
But that's what I was saying. You don't have. There's not like the Ken Womack top 10 Beatle track list out there. I don't see anything. You don't rank. You don't Desert Island.
I do actually. I have a 10 great Beatles moments that's on my brother has a very long running and quite somewhat well known website called The Morning News. That they run out of Brooklyn, even though he and his co-editor don't live in Brooklyn anymore. And I did a piece for them many years ago called 10 Great Beatles Moments. So,
all right.
Yeah, so check that out.
That sounds great.
I think just one of my last finishing thoughts on John, and I'm curious what your take will be. Clearly, there's a ton of mystery because John didn't sort of get to wrap it up himself, right? It was taken from him. But I think the most intriguing thing that I would like to see now is what John would be up to these days. Would he have stayed current? Would he be, I don't even know what he would be. Would he be like a Bowie? Would he be partnering with current musicians? Would he be sort of like McCartney and still playing Beatles songs? What do you think a 2020 John might be?
Well, as I'm sure you're aware, and we've known this for some time, he was itching to play some Beatles songs live. That was kind of exciting to him, the idea. I think, though, he would be exactly as you just said. I think he'd be a lot like David Bowie. He would be, as you know, Bowie was just mesmerized for a good long period by the internet and that kind of interconnection with the world, the instant gratification of saying something and hearing back from people. John Lennon, probably more than Bowie, really loved people. So I imagine he would be living very artificially and virtually in that world.
Sure.
But I imagine if he were alive, he would be politically active. I mean, the week after his murder, he was scheduled to go to the West Coast and participate in a union strike. None of those impulses were gone then, and there'd be plenty of work for him to do.
That's for sure.
No kidding.
Yeah, I think Julian sings this at the beginning of Photograph Smile. Do you remember that album? He has a song, I think it's called Day After Day, and if I'm remembering the lyrics correctly, he says, "Daddy's work is never done." And if he's referring to the work of peace and love and, living openly and with some kind of authenticity, he's right.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
So Ken, we're going to start diving into the track and talking about that soon. But before we get into it, I do have we've been doing now this podcast for a few months and trying to do our research the best we can. And there are some answers that even, Dr. Internet, which is the Dr. Robert of 2020, that even Dr. Internet can't answer. And so I'm hoping maybe you could help us out with some of these things. You may know the answers to some of these.
And then again, I may not.
I've just researched. I can't find them anywhere. So first of all, I know you've done a lot of work researching George Martin and his work. You have a couple books on George Martin. So really important question. George Martin's son, who did those recent remixes of some Beatles work, is it pronounced Giles or Giles?
It's Giles.
Okay, okay. I'm going to write
sure.
that down.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you.
And I'll tell you this. Don't
yeah.
ever call his waistcoat a vest.
Did you learn that one the hard way?
I'm just telling you.
All right, fair enough.
It goes badly.
Okay.
I mean, he
good to
goes
know.
well with it. It's a good look for him, but
Yeah. All right. So then my next question is about George Harrison, lead guitar player for the Beatles, did a lot of great guitar work. His son, is it pronounced Danny or Donnie?
it's Danny.
Danny Harrison.
Okay.
Perfect.
You're
Thank
really
you.
using Ken's time for these questions?
And then
No,
I
it's
think-
good. I
I think this is
thinking
my
about
last
them,
one.
You are a Beatles scholar.
Yeah, well,
No, you
I think
are.
this is
I
my
mean,
last
you know
one.
how to do a works cited page. And could you do a footnote if you had to?
Only APA style, though.
That's fine.
So the last question I had, and you may have actually said this already, but I missed it. John Lennon's son, Julian or Julian? Is it a soft J? I'm not sure.
Okay, I'm starting to doubt you at this point.
Oh, thank you so much, though. So it's Julian. I think I remember now you said, I'm writing all these down for my files. I appreciate it. There we go. Good. All right, I got all I need from this, guys. Becker, what do we have next?
We have a couple of games we like to play with our guests.
I thought that was the game.
No, those were serious questions. What are you talking about?
We have a couple of games we like to play with our guests. It's sort of like I don't know if you're familiar with Top Gear, but we like to set sort of a general bar of where everyone's at. So if you wouldn't mind, we'd like to step into a segment called Mind Games.
Oh, please. Yeah.
There's usually music for that, but Scotty's on his phone.
Oh, sorry.
Will Scott bring that later or?
Well, if he doesn't get fucking fired. The first question we have here that our guests have answered in varying degrees of accuracy, and some went sort of factual and some went more emotionally. But I guess, Tommy, you phrased it this way last time, and I guess maybe I'll riff on it from there. But if aliens came down and you had 60 seconds to describe the Beatles to them, what would you say?
Wow. Maybe that's it. I would say, wow.
Pretty good, actually.
You wouldn't start with their four lovable lads from Liverpool? Because a lot of people started that way.
Yeah,
You're the
no, I
only
was,
one that started that way.
you know what? Well, once I got over the fact that I was seeing aliens,
Sure,
as
yeah.
John Lennon and May Pang had done in 1974.
Yeah.
But as soon as I got over that, I would say, you guys have got to hear this.
And what would you play?
then? Yeah.
Happiness is a Warm Gun, just because it's such a wicked, wonderful tune.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Currently
That's
sits
actually,
at number 1 on the Blotto Beatles list, actually.
Is it really?
Yeah.
That's actually really affirming. Thank you.
Yeah, it is. I feel
We should talk about that in hour 6.
Fantastic. Thank you for humoring us on that one. And we have one more mind game that we like to play. This one I thought would have better uptake, but our guests have been flubbing it a little bit. So there's approximately 70 something answers to this question, I think. And I don't want the answers to be either of the Beatles. The Beatles do not count for the purpose of this question. But I'm going to read the question. Scotty's going to put 30 seconds on the clock. We'll give you a second to sort of take the question in, and then you just start blurting them out. Like I said, I think there's 70 something answers. I'm sorry. Who is on the cover of the Sgt. Pepper's album, not including the Beatles?
Well, you've got you have Dylan.
Great.
Okay, I didn't see this coming. John Wayne is on there. I believe Edgar Allan Poe is making an appearance. There's a figurine that Mal Evans gave them that's on there. Let's see. We've got
Blotto Beatles
Stu
mouse.
Sutcliffe. Man, this is good. Who else do you have?
Don't worry, you're already in the lead, Ken.
I'm in the lead.
Yeah.
Time.
Oh, that was
And that's time. So you just set the new 1, 2, 3, 4.
5.
You have 5. You are the new record.
Are you joking?
We're calling that the Womack line.
That is the new record.
Oh my God.
People freeze
30
up
seconds is
really,
tough.
really quickly. Everyone says James Dean. You didn't say James Dean. Everyone says James Dean when it's
I should have said, and Mae West is not on there because she was kind of
I got points
about
for
it.
saying
I
Gandhi
gave Tommy
wasn't on
credit
there.
for Gandhi because he was part of the shoot, but I believe the Beatles are blocking him on the actual cover. So
nice.
New record set by Ken Womack. So
wow, and I thought I did a poor job.
No, that's you.
I think it's a
basically
hard one,
doubled the high
because
score.
you think about the Sgt. Pepper's record and you think about it sort of as a whole, right? You know, there's sort of a lot of famous people on there, but I don't think that, at least since I was a kid, that I really sat and stared at it and was like, all right, who are these faces, you know?
I wonder if that maybe that's part of the interesting artistic effect, though, that they sort of disappear into the photograph in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Because you also have young and old Beatles there, which
that's right.
Maybe that's what most people are looking at, you know? I wanted to bring in another question on the back of this because we haven't talked about it as a podcast yet. And earlier when we were warming up, you were talking about one of the classes that you teach, one of your it sounded like a general Beatles class. But Rolling Stone super recently just reissued their 500 greatest albums. And Sgt. Pepper's had been number 1 in 2003. It was number 1 in 2012. And it now slipped to 24th place in 2020. Which is a crazy wild slide. And, are people losing interest in the Beatles? Like, what do you think accounts for this? And you're talking to some younger folks and turning them on to the Beatles. Like, what's the take out there?
Well, I think they still adore it. You know, the Beatles are chalking up new fans like nobody's business. They really have not ebbed in that way, except perhaps the early 80s. It's certain. I don't believe it has anything to do with younger listeners, because the demographics are really strong across every sector. I think, if I'm going to be brutally frank, I think it's Rolling Stone trying to be a little au courant and they're breaking the first rule of cool. Actually, do you guys know what the first rule of cool is?
No, I want to know.
Tell
We're
us,
not
please.
cool
Hold
enough.
on.
Apparently, no one ever told me. Okay, I'm going to change your life tonight.
Yes.
Okay, the first rule of cool is don't try to be cool.
Oh, yeah.
I knew that one. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I've heard, about the story. I haven't read it, to be frank. I've just heard about the slippage you just described and some other issues with it. And I think they're trying to be cool. I think they're trying to, what was it? They gave, instead of giving Bruce's last album, Western Stars, 5 stars, they gave it 4.
Yeah. Sure.
And I love the album. I thought it was a 5-star record, but
That's the best thing he's done in 20 years.
yeah. I mean, no, it's a really excellent how he used the orchestration. But the point is,
Absolutely.
I think that's what's going on there. I've of the 24 albums ahead of it, are they all better than Sgt. Pepper?
I mean, Revolver is there, so I guess
White
it depends
Album.
on where you land.
The White Album got wiped from the top 25, didn't it?
Yeah, it's not on there at all. Abbey Road is ahead of. Is Abbey Road ahead of Sgt. Pepper's?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think Abbey Road is
Yeah.
ahead of Sgt.
Top 5 or something.
And
yeah.
the White Album's not in the top 25?
But that's, I think, because they read your Solid State book. That really pumped it up on the list for them.
No,
right,
that's
yeah.
bogus. That's bogus. The White Album is such a brash, wonderful, crazy, ambiguous, ambitious work.
Yeah.
You're gonna have Lou Reed on there. You have the White Album above that. I mean, that's nuts. And I'm the Revolver fascination. I enjoy. It is a great record by anybody's standards. But where they go with production on Sgt. Pepper exceeds that, and I think is more dramatic and effective. So I don't buy that. It's interesting in this country, and I realize I'm going off on a tangent. It's probably from drinking beer to be on your show.
Hey.
But the point is, that's only become fashionable in the United States since the CDs came out, and we got to hear what Revolver really sounded like.
Yeah.
So I don't know. What do you guys think about that list?
I mean, I appreciate that they're trying to consider more modern things. I don't listen to some of the other more modern music in the top 10, so I hate to just sort of cling on to what I love. But yeah, I think to go from like this is the top number one record for two of your major lists, and then for it to slide to 25th place, it's like you said, I think it's a statement. I think it's trying to be cool. I think it's like, oh, we're not going to make another list that the Beatles just dominate. But I mean, without a doubt, I think until the end of the earth that people will be finding and discovering Sgt. Pepper's.
Absolutely.
You know?
And there's definitely some recency bias going on the list, you know.
It's the that's right. It's the primacy of contemporaneousness or something. That's exactly
however,
right.
they are, you know, to their credit, they are finally including some hip hop on there and things like that maybe haven't been recognized on these past lists as heavily. And that's important too. And so,
no doubt.
It's a weird line to draw in the sand, you know, of where those things meet, that we need to diversify our interests and what we're listening to, but also appreciate like this wide range that time is a factor here, right?
Yeah. Totally.
And ultimately, number one, I believe, is Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, which feels super relevant to right now.
I operate a thing we call Record Club at the university, and we've just entered our 5th season, and we did What's Going On, and yeah, it's remarkable. It's I have no problem with that. In fact, I think that should be spoken about in the same breath as great Beatles works.
Yeah,
you know, it was like I described a moment ago, the White Album. That's Marvin Gaye going in the studio and with a vision and nailing it.
Yeah,
totally,
absolutely.
Yes. I almost picked contemporaneous as my magical mystery word, but I didn't.
Can we drink anyway, or how does
let's have it. Well,
yeah, you're still allowed to drink whenever you choose to.
There are. Speaking of drinking, there are a couple things we haven't touched upon yet, and we do have some rules to this show, Ken. This is not just a fly-by-night affair, and if you or any of our listeners are interested in those rules, they can check out our website, blottobeatles.com. One of those rules, though, is that every episode, our executive producer, Scotty C, picks a magical mystery word. We all have a drink on standby. If we say this word in the episode at some point, we have to drink that drink down. And so right now, I'm going to plug my ears for a second and shut my eyes. And Scotty is going to say the magical mystery word to the audience. Paperback. Thank you, Scotty. And along with that, we all have some drinks on hand tonight. We're all having a couple cocktails safely in our homes. We are in the virtual studio. We are doing this responsibly. We are enjoying Blotto Beatles responsibly. But with that on hand, we also have, guys, what has recently become the official beer of Blotto Beatles. I think we're all drinking tonight, the Devil's Purse Handline Kolsch. I have one going. It's good times here in the virtual Abbey Road. So with all that said, I do want to remind you, please don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to us on your pod catcher of choice. And if you feel so compelled, maybe you drop that 5-star review. I mean, we've got a 5-star guest here tonight in Ken Womack, so drop that 5 stars. That goes a long way. We're also available on all those socials at Blotto Beatles. You can find us Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, also the oldest people on TikTok. Or you can email us. This is similar to how, John communicated with Yoko during the lost year. He would email her, and you can email us, blottobeatles@gmail.com, or find us at blottobeatles.com. Everybody, Ken, I don't know if you know this. We have a sort of pilgrimage we're on right now. This is a quest we have. Are you a Twitter user? You are. We follow you on Twitter. Yeah.
Sure.
I don't know if you've noticed. Original Beatles drummer Pete Best does not have a blue verified check mark on Twitter. It's unbelievable. I know, this is unbelievable, right? We are trying to make this happen. So we're really pushing here, Ken, and you can maybe help us. You have a platform that can help us with this. We're pushing a hashtag here. Hashtag Pete Best get that check. So we're all getting that out there. Pete Best deserves a blue verified check mark. And I think, guys, yeah,
you should tell his half brother Rogue about this. He'll get it done like tonight.
Lickety split.
That guy's a monster. He'll make it happen.
All right. I didn't know. See, this is what I'm talking about.
Enlist him in this activity.
His name is Rogue?
ROAG.
Oh,
hold on. I'm going to call you later and ask you how to pronounce that, by the way. I'm writing it down, but I'm going to forget. Without further ado, I think it's probably time to get into Ken's pick of the extrasode here.
All All right, this is cool. I'm into this Yoko tune we're going to get into. Walking on Thin Ice. Came out 1981, early 1981, in January. They recorded it in December. I'm not sure if they had the Double Fantasy players with them. I'm not sure who was in the studio to record this track with them. I'm hoping Ken will know that, but we'll get there. But they finished this track up on December 8th in 1980. It happens to be the day that John was tragically shot. And I read that he had a cassette tape of the mix of this on that very moment, which is incredible. And he loved this tune. He played it over and over and over, and he put some guitar work on it. He played an old Rickenbacker that he hadn't played since the Beatles days, what I read. And it's very cool guitar work. It's the song itself is nothing rock and roll at all. It is a dancey pop jam. It almost sounds like the Clash of the time, like a little bit like of that 80s
combat rock.
Yeah, and dropping the beat like that, and the bass is going. But then she comes in with her totally, only Yoko can do it. The artsy vocal stuff, and the performance is so cool. I think it did really well on the charts. On the dance chart, I think it went to the top. I think it was up around 50 or so on the Billboard, and even more in the UK. But I don't know a lot about it. I never actually even heard this song until we talked about it doing this episode. So,
Same.
Ken, what made you pick it? Is it related to the book you just released, or just something for fun? How'd you get there with this one?
You bet. I absolutely adore this song, and I feel like I'm only just now hearing it because when I was 14. Actually, I was 15 on the day it came out, I believe, in 1981 or close to it. And I'd heard about the tune, but of course, I didn't hear it until after he was murdered. And like just about anything associated with that terrible period, there's this before and after effect, right? So the famous cover of Rolling Stone with the Annie Leibovitz cover would have had such a different effect if we all weren't looking at him and thinking, oh my God, why has he been ripped out of the world, right? This is the same way. It just it took me a long time to be able to hear it and disassociate it. But frankly, once I have, it's emerged as easily in my top 5 Beatles solo tracks. And while it is definitely a Yoko Ono song, it's such a wonderful collaboration between John and Yoko and of course Jack Douglas to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. I love its story. I love that they worked on it. She had written it riding back in the car coming home from their place out on Long Island. And that's when she scribbled out the lyrics. Scribbled suggests that that's when she composed the lyrics. And then later, they did record it in August 1980 as part of the project. And then they pick it up again, just out of happenstance that last week or so, because John couldn't get it off of his mind. And what they do is they go back in the studio and they remake it. And that's where you get that fantastic guitar solo. And Jack Douglas plays the whammy bar on it.
Cool.
Oh, I didn't know that part.
Oh, yeah. It's sort of the way that John would help George out by playing the volume pedal.
Right.
The volume knob sometimes on his guitar when they were working in the studio. But it's and they added that amazing poem that Yoko started, that improv piece at the end.
I love that part.
That was improvised?
And I think it's her best vocal performance, too. She modulates her voice really well. In fact, the vocal is much better than back in August of 1980. She really improves that vocal. And they had lots of effects. You can just hear them having fun with this. No wonder he was so consumed with this song, right?
It was
you can see why. And what I love is the very end, that last night, as they're listening to playback, John has this almost light bulb moment, right? And he says, this is the direction. Like, this guy who's done everything in the last waning moments of his life, has found the direction.
Yeah.
I just love that. But I think the song is, it has moments of drama, comedy, the poetics literally of the poem. It's beautiful stuff.
And it grooves.
Now, it does have a great groove. And that's another thing, too. See, going back to the before and after effect, right? If this song had been able to be released without the horrible, overwhelming sadness of his murder, think about it. I mean, it could have climbed the charts on its own.
Right.
Yes.
Without having to connect with all that just nausea and nightmarishness. I remember that Christmas. One of the great things about the holidays was you would hear "Happy Christmas, War is Over." And it's such a beautiful seasonal song. And that Christmas, every time they'd play it, and they were playing it more, it's just
of course
tearing your heart out.
Yeah.
Well, and there's a little bit like the thing I was picking up on in the song. There's so much that's prophetic about what happens to John. In little hints he drops. I mean, we were even talking about this with the Happiness is a Warm Gun episode that we did as a podcast, was just released, and we recorded it a little while ago. But there's so much in that becomes prophetic and it's sadly tragic about what happens to John. And the lyrics that stuck with me were those when she says, "When our hearts return to ashes, it'll just be a story." And when we think now in 2020 about this, it feels like she is announcing in a way what's gonna come to pass. That I picked up on that, and
it's oddly like prophetic lyric wise a bit.
And just heartbreaking, just tragic that this whole thing, their lives. And I think, again, coming back to your book, that's one of the things that I really am pulling out of it, is this idea of John telling everyone, I'm just a man and I'm trying to figure out my own path like anyone else. And we look back at it now in 2020, and is it just a story, not this life that
sure, and
he was trying to figure out like anyone.
Exactly what I was trying to do. I wanted to disassociate the fact that we know what's going to happen at the end from the story as it's happening, because he's going through this just amazing, energetic, forward momentum like experience. And that I wish I'd had when I was 40 years old.
Right. Sure. I got when you threw out this track, I hunted down the 45 single on vinyl, and Yoko has some words on the back of this that she writes out. And basically she says that she woke up one morning and John had already been up. It was the sunrise, and John was listening to this track on repeat essentially. And they were talking about how they were going to release it. And they were talking about that maybe they'd put Yoko on the B side they'd put John on the B side and Yoko would be on the A side and release it together. And Yoko was like, well, they're just going to play the John stuff. That. And she was like, yeah, we should put you out as a solo artist. But it's interesting here where she talks about that they envision themselves always as a group and not necessarily as solo artists. And it made me think a little bit about like, why do you think, Ken, that where's the grief that Yoko gets? Like, where does it come from? Because it's almost like institutionalized in sort of Beatles fandom in a way. And it blows my mind that you have a Yoko track in your top 5 sort of solo Beatles projects, so where does it come from? And it doesn't, I think in modern times it's catching up a bit. It's not, I don't think it's as bad as it was, but when I learned about the Beatles, I almost identically learned this hatred for Yoko.
Yeah, and it's still pretty profuse, as you see on Facebook and other places like that. I've never really understood it, but I also I've never been one to say Beatles or Rolling Stones. Paul's better than John, or John's better than Paul, or why was Ringo in that band? I think those are weird historical games, right? That you can't really play because history played out in a certain way, and even John explains it so well. I think he was talking to Larry Kane, from Philly, and they were talking about his days with May Pang, and John said, yeah, and I love May Pang. She's a good friend and just a great person, but and I think was probably very good for him. But and basically Larry was saying, well, why did you leave her and go back to Yoko? And he said, well, we had some great times. We made some great music, and she was sexy. And he says all this stuff, but he said, I had to be there. I don't say that in any kind of way that's denigrating. His connection with her was very strong. And I think anybody who's ever had a romantic relationship or has found their soulmate should understand that. And who are we to know who they are when the doors are closed, right? So
absolutely. It's so weird for the entire world to be like,
I've never understood it. Yeah. And yet if you love, and he would say this, I think, or paraphrase this, he would say, well, if you love me, then you've got to like her. I mean, that's, I really think that song might have been the one. But of course, strangely, even in the most violent kind of widowhood, she still has so many critics who are so personal and nasty about her. I really tried to show in this book the many ways that she was supportive. John Lennon was not rushing out to have a record. She knew he wanted it, and it was very important to him. But he relied on her to set those conditions. If there were any moment along the way where something could have gone wrong, and he would have run back up to his room and thrown himself into a book or what have you, and that would have been it. And she knew this was a big dream for him. And, whatever their relationship was in 1980, what I like about it is, and I hope this for everybody's relationship, they were each other's cheerleader.
Yeah.
I love
really
that
comes
scene
through,
that, David Geffen has spoken of many times where they're making the deal with him for the record contract. And, he pulls David Geffen aside and he says, hey, David, look, we've had our success. I want this to be for Yoko. Let's work hard here. And then she's doing the same thing. David, this is really important to John. Don't blow this, buddy.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, just beautiful partners in the whole thing.
Yeah, and it's hard to show your love like that to the world, and then for someone to sort of shit on it a bit, it's hard not to think that there's.
I don't know how she does it. I think she's probably very tough and very vigilant. But man, I've never understood it.
I don't want to make you sling arrows at any of your peers, but he's no longer with us. But I think the Goldman book didn't do any help. What do you think about Lives of Lennon?
Probably not. But again, that was sort of one of the books that bothers me because I wouldn't have minded all of the salaciousness, and I understand that. You can go into the city, in fact, and his archive is there and actually listen to his recordings and confirm. See, this is what Tommy and I do as scholars. You can go in and you can actually check the sources. But what he does so badly that I think aligns the project is if you're going to do a warts and all kind of study, then show us why the music is so great that you had to go in and tell that story. Because if we don't have the music, why are you telling John Lennon's story? You're not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
he's not a movie star, per se. So I don't understand that approach. You remember Goldman really seemed consumed with calling John. I think he used the word whelp at one point to describe him like he was just in some way her whipping boy.
Yeah,
and reading back over that period, and there are so many wonderful books by folks who weren't trying to tear him down, where they've put together so much of the commentary from people who knew John and knew Yoko, and they're not coming up with the same thing.
And that made me think about, while reading your book, it made me think about Goldman and some of the stories I had thought about the Dakota, where it felt maybe like it was a more controlling environment or something like that with Yoko. With Yoko in charge, and then sort of hearing this other take on it sort of really turned my mind around a bit.
I think that the fact that he does spend large parts of a couple of years there in the late 70s, again, reading, watching TV, what have you. I mean, this guy has been a Beatle, which first of all exhausts you. And what did George Harrison say? You give away your nervous system.
Yeah.
And then he has several different front legal fights, Morris Levy, but most importantly, the immigration fight.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And then they have a newborn, which is a very special situation.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine all of that. The guy is exhausted.
Well, and it's interesting, like he like these flights of fancy that you pick up on in the book, where it's like, today I'm into making bread, and next week I'm into sailing, and but it all comes back to the things he truly cares about and loves, and the things that have always driven him. It's that partnership with Yoko, his desire to be a good father and a better father than he was yesterday, right? And
with
and then yeah, exactly, and then that draw to music that always pulls him back, and that I love he's fighting with the muse a bit, and he's trying to figure out where to go. One of the things in the partnership with Yoko that stuck out to me in the book is this idea that he says to her, like, the B-52s are basically ripping you off, Yoko. Like, you were doing this years ago, and like, what a cool thing for a partner and husband to do, to be like pumping her up and try and be like, let's get back to this. And you have something to offer here.
Yeah. Before I read the book, Ken, I was I knew what was coming out. I knew your premise. You spoke about it on another podcast. And one of my thoughts always was like, was John curious about punk rock or any of that stuff? And you answered pretty early that he had no interest, but I was always most curious if he had ever heard the Talking Heads or been to CBGBs or something like that. But it sounds like he discounts most of that pretty much off the bat.
Well, I want to make sure I'm being accurate about this. So, he very likely was not at CBGBs, but he had heard many current songs. I mean, he and Fred Seaman would drive around in what Fred calls the company car, their station wagon, and they would listen to the radio. And John was familiar, and if he would get interested in something, he'd send Fred out to go to the record store and buy up something. Right? He was very entranced with reggae for a long period during this era. I don't think he necessarily disliked punk, but he liked structure in his music. So what fascinates me is how people want to sort of place on him this mantle that he must have loved punk. Yeah. Like they need him to be kind of this edgy, what am I saying? A person who loves the musical margins. His output doesn't suggest that. He liked straight rock and roll. He was a student. Yeah. He was a scholar, Tommy, of the 50s. He knew
so we're in good company
rock and
then,
roll
Ken.
better than he knew what he ate last week for dinner.
Yeah.
That was his area. And it makes sense. He grew up with it. And he knew the nooks and crannies of it. But it's funny how I think a lot of people try to sort of sublimate what they believe he should have been onto him. Like he should have been into punk, because he wore a leather jacket in Hamburg or whatever. He was edgy, but he was edgy. It's you guys will understand, since some of you are former English majors, you are what you read. And John read a lot of nonfiction, and he read editorials. He was intellectually edgy.
Yeah, I think that's I think you're right. Like punk was not made for those people, period. Right? Like at the age that punk is happening, like it's not for John. I mean, I guess all things that Bowie is hanging out and taking it in, and
Yeah, they play new wave. I went to school dances during that period. They weren't playing this underground punk sound. They'd play the new wave, like crazy. But they weren't playing the Sex Pistols or anything like that. You had to go seek them out.
Well, and as Scott said earlier, like I think there is a kind of late Clash vibe to the song. Scott pointed that out when we were first listening to it. I was like, I hadn't heard that before.
I can hear that too. Now, Yoko's songs on that record, especially Double Fantasy, are more au courant. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the Talking Heads. We did a record club on the Talking Heads recently, and my God, many of her songs would fall right. This was what's the album? I can't remember the name of the record. The one that came out in 79, 80.
Remain in the Light.
Thank you. Remain in Light. Several of her songs could fit on there. Every Man Has a Woman Who Loves Him.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way John supports her, I'm sure you guys have heard the version where John had sung a backing vocal and they wiped all the other vocals. And he really
I haven't
brings
heard
it
that.
on that thing.
Yeah.
I went through all the takes,
I have
and then
not,
there's
yeah.
the one that's in the, I think it's in a Yoko box or something where John says, "You just recorded your first number one" or whatever it is.
Yeah, I heard that.
That feels really nice. My wife's supportive. Like it's just awesome to hear that support. Like we were talking about.
He's
before,
also, of course, echoing George Martin,
sure.
whom he brings up during those sessions. He would bring up George as having taught him how to double track, and I'm going to keep double tracking.
What do we think about the covers of this tune? Did you guys listen to any of those covers? Costello does a take of this.
I like this
84
version a lot. But what it lacks, he sort of, to my ears, he kind of sands it down to its basic parts. And while I've listened to it several times, it's not the same kind of hyper technicolor experience of the other one.
Yeah, it's
and
definitely
the other
like
one
a
actually,
Costello tune,
Yeah, and the other and actually the Yoko version even feels a little dangerous, right, and dark. She's kind of anticipating Depeche Mode,
Whoa, very cool.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it.
There's also, I don't know if it's a re-recording or not, that Yoko does, and she does it with Jason Pierce of Spiritualized. I don't know if you guys listen to that one. And It's very much like it's big, orchestral. It's super, super space psychedelic rock, and that one's pretty fantastic too. Actually, I thought
I was more than I think I like the original the best, but that's second place in my mind. I dug that version.
We'll post all these up on the social channels when this episode drops, and everyone can check it out and let us know what you think about it. Ken, to wrap up on Goldman a little bit, you too went after Goldman on Rattle and Hum. Would you feel like your life's work was complete if like Coldplay or Radiohead came after you?
I would quit. I mean, that would be it.
I do want to ask. So you
Radiohead will probably come after me after I write my Radiohead book. That's when it'll happen.
Hopefully, we'll be ready to do a drunken Radiohead podcast at that point.
Yeah. What's Ed gonna say to you? Come on. I do. Before we wrap up on the song, I thought you just made a great point about what's missing from the Elvis Costello version, and I guess my final question is, and I don't know how easy this is to pinpoint, what do you think it is that draws us into this song specifically that makes it as captivating as it is, that we want to listen to it? And I'm not even talking, it's hard to separate it from the story of what happened to John, right? Yeah. But the musicality of it, what do you think works that makes it happen?
Well, I can feel just the high energy of them really enjoying the process of adding all the effects on, of remaking the song. And when you go back and you listen to the version from August 1980, I mean, it's the same song, but it's not the same song. Mm-hmm. They had very specific things they wanted to do, and they probably had, several happy accidents in the studio and just blow it out of the park. You're right. You can't separate it. You cannot truly disassociate it from what happened that night. I think a lot of people listen to it at least the first time for ghoulish reasons. Yeah. But for me, it's it's a great headphone song. It has a lot of great space in it. Jack really produced that song well. They had an excellent engineer there. It's just beautiful stuff.
I agree with that totally. It wasn't. I liked it when I was listening to it on speakers in a room, and it wasn't until I threw some headphones on and spent some time with it that it allowed me to get underneath it a little bit and, hear some of the other stuff that was going on. And
you can hear great artistic choices being made, that are obviously impulses that someone had in the studio. But like, for example, that loop she does when she says night, night, and at the end, they bring it back. And it's it makes it even more menacing. It's really just such a great impulse the way that works.
Yeah, and then you do add the story back in, and there's a portion of listening to this where there's some level of, like, I don't know, Greek tragedy or something in listening to this, that it's like so
All right,
epically
English majors, why don't you get your own podcast?
Yeah. What are you drinking?
Oh, I'm having the official beer of Blotto Beatles, the Devil's Person on Kolsch. What are you drinking? No, but I just think it raises the bar, not the bar. That's the wrong thing to say. There's a focus on it because of what happens. Like you said, Scotty, he's walking home with the tape in his pocket, and
you can't disassociate it.
Yeah. And the promise of John saying, like you said, Ken, that was the first time I heard it. Like, this is it. This is where we go. This is the road for us. And that question that he'd been asking himself the last 5 years about how do I do this seems like it just got answered, and then it's cut off right then. It's awful, unbelievably tragic.
Well, thanks a ton for bringing this track to our attention. I was really excited to talk about this. It was awesome to sort of veer a little bit off the Beatles journey and explore something a bit more unexpected.
Well, thank you.
Ken, you've made the grave mistake of giving me your phone number because I have it in the emails.
Yeah.
Do we have your permission to drunk text you for a new segment called Don't Know, Ask the Woe?
Oh, of course. Yeah, you do.
We have an on-call Beatles scholar, argument-ending Beatles scholar. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
So when you get a 2 a.m. text from me that says, so is it Zach Starkey or Zach? Yeah. You're like, oh, what did I do?
Tommy, run Ken down the current state of our ranking list.
Yeah, so Ken, we just last week released episode 9. We've recorded a few more that we have in the tank here, but we have officially live ranked 9 Beatles songs. So I'm going to go worst to best. And I think what we're interested to hear from you once I finish up here is, based on these 9 songs, do you have anything you totally disagree with? Or are you saying anything is we're on the right track? As a fellow Beatles scholar, I assume that you'll agree with a lot of what we've said here.
You would like to be partially critical.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I want to. I just want to hear. I want your honest take on it, if you think we're on the right track here. And I know you're not the biggest fan of saying one thing is better than another.
No, but I'll do it this time. Yeah, I'm with you.
All right, I appreciate that. I do. So right now in last place, and it's only because we only have 9 songs that we've ranked live so far, is "Tell Me Why," the John Lennon tune from Hard Day's Night. Next at number 8, we've got "All My Lovin'," the one that was on Ed Sullivan there.
I do.
Yeah, coming up at number 7, we've got "Good Day Sunshine" from Revolver. At number 6, we've got the John Lennon tune "Nowhere Man" from Rubber Soul. Number 5, from Let It Be, "I've Got a Feelin'," maybe the last collaborative effort of the boys there. 4, we've got "Fixin' a Hole." And then at number 3, we have from Abbey Road, "Because." And number 2, and I got to tell you, this was number 1 for a long, long, long time. The song "Long, Long, Long" from the White Album by George Harrison. That was a sleeper hit for us. It took a while to take it off the throne. And the only thing that took it off, now at number 1, "Happiness is a Warm Gun," the John Lennon song from the White Album.
Yeah, well, I would agree with that. And how do you come up with these? Is it by each episode?
Yeah, each episode. So Scott, usually, unless we have a guest like you tonight, you picked this tune tonight, but Scott usually picks the song, and then we just talk about it for an hour or so. Well, we talk about it for like 3 hours, and then Scott somehow edits that down to a coherent hour.
Sure.
And at the very end, we place it on the list.
Tell Me Why at the bottom. It's an homage to the girl groups and all of that stuff, but I don't seek it out.
Yeah.
I would move "Good Day Sunshine" though to number 9. It's
really
well. I mean, it's all very self-consciously trying to redo the "Love and Spoonful." It's a beautiful song. It has that lilting piano solo. I think that is George Martin, right, playing that. But
yep.
It just doesn't have the staying power of "Happiness is a Warm Gun," which is so intricate. I mean, what your list is missing, obviously, is "A Day in the Life."
Yeah, when we get there, I'll be interested to see. Where we personally put it,
But "Happiness is a Warm Gun" is exactly in the right place. What were the? I like "Long, Long, Long." That's a nice edgy choice.
Yeah.
You know what I thought was what really changed "Long, Long, Long" for us is that most of us sort of grew up with the digital transfers of Beatles to CD, I guess, for the most part. And Long, Long, Long is so shittily mastered that I think it never popped for me. And then really spending some time with it for the purpose of this podcast changed my mind.
Well, and those two mixes that Giles, or is it Giles? I thought his best work on that set was making all those mixes available to us of Long, Long, Long. That song pops now in ways it didn't before by pulling, he separated it so well that all the instruments are distinctive. It's less muddy.
When it hits a climax that is like
so many tears.
We talked about it, I think, in the episode. There's like you've just climbed the top of the mountain moment in that song that's cathartic and like beautiful. And you read about the story behind it too, and it's this idea of George kind of wanting to give up throughout like take 60 that they're doing that night or whatever it is, and Paul being the one to really push him, be like, we're onto something here. This is a good song. And that, you know, when you hear that and then you go back and listen to it and you kind of hear that brotherhood at play at a time that is noted as not the kindest, you know, moment in Beatles history for each other, you know. And I love that there are these spots where it still comes up if you dig a little deeper.
Awesome. Well, hopefully we can check in with you a little bit on the list. And
now that you have my number, I expect to be on every episode. So,
and now, when is that George book coming up?
What's that?
When are we going to hear that or get a chance to read that George book?
July, I believe. I mean, one of the problems is it needs to be what we call finished.
Is that a literary term?
Is that a scholarly term?
You can use the word done, completed.
Well, I would love if when you do release that, if you would come here and talk some George with us, because
you bet. Well, I'll need to bring my buddy Jason Krupa. He handled most of All Things Must Pass, and I'm the Layla guy. That sounded wrong.
Okay. No, we got it. Yeah. Ken, out there in the world of the internet, where can people find you? Where can they hunt you down?
Well, I hope they'll visit KennethWomack.com and they can sign up for my newsletter, check out the podcast. It is not as raucous or fun as this one, which has alcohol and three cool guys. And I have no swag for my podcast. You guys have the finest podcast swag. I've probably been on 100 podcasts and I've never gotten swag.
So we're pretty much the best podcast in
if I were ranking them 1 to 9, you would be number 1.
9.
Well, this is great. I look forward, obviously, as a fellow scholar, to my upcoming negotiations with Monmouth University. Like, I think, you know, I'm not, like I told you, I'm not looking for tenure right away, just like an adjunct professor position, I think, for a few years as I find my foothold. And, you know, we can get lunch and things every day.
Oh, that'll be nice. I mean, right now it's a socially distanced lunch, but a great place to eat here on the shore.
So Blotto Beatles, this podcast is produced, edited, composed, and magically assembled by our executive producer, as we said, the George Martin of New England, Scotty C. Ken, he deserves 2 books about him as well. Yeah. We also have additional musical supervision and assistance from our good friend and yours, RB. That B stands for Beatles. You can check him out on all those socials at Ryan O'Brooks. And speaking of social media, you can hit us up as well at Blotto Beatles. Please remember, everybody, this show is performed by absolute scholars and professionals, and we encourage you to enjoy Blotto Beatles responsibly. Don't forget, subscribe, rate us on your podcast app of choice. Hey, everybody, peace and love.
Peace and love.
Peace and love. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, guys.